Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm joined by my co host, the one, the only, Abraham Stein.
That's me.
It's true. You are the only Abraham Stein I know, for what's worth.
Yeah, I don't actually know. There's enough of them that my professional Gmail had to have a number in it.
Do you know my Gmail?
No,
It's spencerhowland at gmail.com.
that's so lucky.
I also got into Gmail early.
Yeah, I got in late. So yeah, it's
Luckily, my wife's name is Devonair, and she also got hers because there's no, people with that name anyway. And then also,
yeah.
definitely no people with that name with my last name. So it was
Yeah,
really
there's
funny.
not so many Abraham Steins that I had to go like super deep into what the numbers were, but I did have to go with a nice hearty 2.
Ooh,
So
ooh, that's rough. There's no underscore or dot that could have been in that place.
no, I tried Abraham Dotstein and that didn't go either. So there's
Mm,
probably like a dozen or two,
sure, sure. That you needed to be earlier to that. That's part of always improving, man. Well, next time next time there's a new generational email or equivalent, you'll get in early, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of which, what is your always improving moment this week? That is the point of the show, Abe. We want to be getting better all the time. Be doing what we can to improve. What did you do to improve at Magic Life this week?
Yeah, so my always improving this week came from um, SGCon New Jersey. That's where I was. Um, where in the main event, I honestly I was really frustrated with my performance. I thought that it was a modern 20K main event. I was playing Hammer Time. I was super comfortable with the format, and or at least coming in, I thought I was super comfortable with the format and the deck I was playing and the list and everything. But a couple things happened right before the tournament that um, kind of threw me for a loop and I didn't have much time to prepare for. One was that I decided for the first time in a very long time to register blue cards, so registering Spell Pierce and specifically and Lavinia, because of the fact that Creativity, a matchup that I have not played a huge amount since it became very popular, is really popular, and that's a very important card to have if you plan on playing as the matchup, which I did several times. And partially because of like the rise in the like fair breach decks in modern, I kind of underestimated how much I would have to be learning and adjusting on the fly, and I didn't really come in to the tournament feeling as prepared to do that as maybe I should have. And I definitely felt myself. I played 6 matches. I felt like all 6 were winnable, and I only won 3 of them. And like that experience was really frustrating, but also really like humbling in a sense where my always improving comes in. It's not only like seeing exactly why it is that being fully prepared for, if my objective was to win that tournament, then the amount of preparation I put in was not nearly enough. And I was able to see that and really feel what it is to feel that kind of unprepared and know that. But also, like the improving is that I know compared to where I would have been having that exact kind of experience in any format, even just a few years ago, back when I was playing the SG Tour, I would not have had the same understanding of where it was that those mistakes were being made and the things that I could have done better, because all 3 of them I identified pretty immediately. Like, yep, this is where I made a mistake tactically. This is how I could have known to not make the mistake or eliminated. I could have made the decision easier for me to make correctly. And just overall, like I felt really happy with my play in a lot of spots, and like I was playing at a really high level, but I was making these mistakes that I couldn't afford to make because I needed to be playing at that high level. And some of the things, like one of them was in the moment realizing that I could like narrow the range that my like of removal spells my creativity opponent could have down to like half of what I was actually considering and make a better decision on that. Like that kind of mistake and identifying that as a mistake instead of, oh, well, I tried to play her on this and then I played her on that instead and they had the other thing, like being like, no, I could have known that it couldn't be this other thing I played around. And I took a line that considered maybe too much of these other things. Um, just kind of like really was motivating to me in the way of like, I have gotten a lot better at a lot of these things, and I have improved a lot.
I find your comment about removal spells really interesting. And one, I think that not going into a tournament without playing that matchup and playing Hammer Time was probably really hard. Um, and I also know that my team has actually been playtesting that matchup quite a bit because most of our RCQs are modern, and we, at least two of us have access to the X-Whale guide and stuff like that, and we actually just disagree with Will. Will has that listed. Just spoiler alert, people, but he has it listed as hammer favored, and all of us disagree. Basically, even if you know the matchup well, hammer can win, but it's actually, in our opinion, not just myself, but like most of the people that I test with, pretty creativity. Maybe not pretty favored, but like definitely creativity favored, winnable for hammer is like how I would describe it. And
well, to get into the weeds about it a bit here,
yeah,
can I just ask which creativity build you're playing? Like what exact kind of 75 you're playing?
So I play the 5-color version. Personally, I will be playing that this weekend. I'm actually close to running back almost the exact 75 that I bombed out of the last RCQ with. I like the list a lot. A lot of things had to go wrong, and I kind of talked about it on the show, but we've also tested just the quote unquote teamer builds. We've tested the 4-color builds. We've tested a lot of them, but I think that just the fact that Prismari command exists, can and pressures you in like an interesting way, and then like the way that so the thing. Let me say it this way. I think that hammers good draws do hammer stuff, but when it doesn't do that, you're in trouble pretty often.
Yeah, I think that if you don't have Spell Pierce in your hammer deck, and
all the lists that we've been testing have been pretty close to Will's, so they all have Spell Pierce.
Yeah, and so I'm just saying, if you don't have Spell Pierce in your deck, it's definitely not hammer favored. You're definitely in trouble, and that's why I chose to play blue this weekend, because I realized that creativity was creativity, and specifically the card Force of Vigor. I think the Force of Vigor decks were really well positioned this weekend. Like having Spell Pierce and Lavinia for those kinds of problems was really important to me. The other thing is that it depends on the build of creativity. The builds of creativity have been trending more and more towards being like very strong against hammer, or trying to be as strong as possible against hammer. The list that I was talking about in this match was the Uriel list, which is the barely teamer blue-red creativity deck, which is just like blue-red creativity with Renin 6, and then post-board it has access to like Besage's 2 and 3, Nature's Claim 1 to 3, and like has like main deck Mana Lake and like 4 Spell Pierce. Really, really lean on the interaction too, like Burst Lightning, Lightning Bolt.
I know which list you're talking about.
Yeah, and the 4 commands. So that was like why it was kind of a nightmare. So there's so much for me to consider. But where like I came into the event right being prepared with that knowledge, but where coming back to my always improving, where I like realized I had this room to grow in that match was that I started playing around if my opponent had Nature's Claim as opposed to like a Lightning Bolt or a Fire Ice or any of these other things they could have had, when I didn't consider, because I hadn't played the matchup enough to know that this is what, like in the moment, this is what a creativity player would be doing. That if they had Nature's Claim, they would have like killed my Urza Saga or my Sigarda's Aid in the like window of time I'm thinking about, where I'm like putting my hammer with my Sigarda's Aid trigger that I'm trying to play around these different removal spells. And it's something that like is that intricate that really shows that those are the edges I have to have. But I think that I'm still like I thought that I was still like very able to win that match, even though their deck's kind of built to beat mine.
I actually think that the line you just gave there is the line that should be the takeaway for both yourself and the listener, right? In order to win that matchup, you need to understand those edges. Like understand where you have to gain an edge in the matchup. That doesn't mean that and what I think gets lost on a lot of Magic players, and I want to hammer home here, but is that just because you're not favored in a matchup doesn't mean a matchup's like people love to speak in hyperbole, but like this is a matchup specifically where if the hammer player knows what they're doing and the creativity player doesn't, the hammer player suddenly becomes favored. So understanding that matchup is really important, especially in current modern, where like they're two of the top 5 decks by a they're really two of the top 3 decks by like a mile.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that like I think that especially as the hammer player, like and as I really, was made aware of through making like 3 minor mistakes that I felt like cost me 3 matches, is that when you're in the position of playing the deck that is a very known quantity metagame, very targeted, and has a lot of room to navigate and to find those edges for yourself, that if you're not grabbing those edges right now, sure, you can be in a position to win even your toughest matchups. Like that would have been me too owing my opponent if I'd made the right decision in that spot. Even through their deck being really constructed as the archetype in the best way to beat hammer. But if you aren't finding all those edges and you aren't really, really doing everything you can to present the right questions at the right time and really play, like, I mean, I would have had to play the best I've ever played with hammer to win all 6 of those matches. And not say that I couldn't have done it. If I had spent more time practicing and been a little more diligent, I think I would have been in a much better shape. But that's what you have to do to really win with hammer and even those tight matchups. And I think that it might be the case, like just back to your testing, it might be the case that that's something that you might find if you play the match like 25 more times, your hammer pilot might start to learn more and more about it, and like it might come closer to like, Will's played a ton of hammer. He's played like infinite matches almost, and he's obviously incredibly good, and probably finds those edges better than most people, and probably better than most of his creativity opponents too. But I wonder if once, because there's kind of a real question gap of like how good are you at putting the creativity player in that awkward spot as the hammer player, like I wonder if that would start to even out for you, because I felt like it was really, really close. Like I felt like every match play against creativity, no matter the build, some of the builds were a little easier. Like I think that the 5-color builds, because they're a little clunkier with the removal they have, they're not just all like that. The teamer deck was just all like 1 mana removal spells, spell pierces, like really just catch you at any time, which was really tough to deal with. But yeah, if you're even in a bit of a clunky draw with the 4-color deck, it's probably a little easier when you draw your spell pierces. But
yeah,
it is really close, and that's like Modern's just so good right now, because
I mean I lost a hammer in my last RCQ. Myself, and like I do think that I'm at this point I think I'm a pretty competent player with creativity, so I agree with you that it's pretty close. So for me, always improving has been focused a little bit differently this week. My wife and I made the decision, we like to be personal on this podcast, so I wanted to share this during the segment, that I'm a stay-home dad now. I stayed at home with both my kids today. My son had no school today, so I was on dad duty full time, and we're kind of working out like what that means, how I edit content, how I do things like that. But additionally, like being raised in the religion I was raised in, this would be like a huge no-no. Like this, there's a lot of religious trauma that I have to overcome to kind of be willing to do this, and it's really interesting to. I don't know, put myself through that. And like I had a ton of fun today. Like I enjoyed spending an entire day with my kids, just me and them, making them happy, making them breakfast. Like I miss work a lot, but there comes a point where like we were basically out of money for a babysitter. Babysitters right now are really expensive, and we were talking about what Theo was like. You know what? Like, but like, I think that scheduling nap times and like getting the stuff that I need to get done to like try to find a new job, and like the stuff that I need to do for Magic, like I can have a 18-month-old. Like, that's totally fine. And kind of learning to navigate that and learning what that means for me in both the future of Magic is a fun challenge, but also one that I wanted to just kind of share on the podcast. Like, I've had listeners talk to me about, how the success of my career made them, like, work harder in theirs and, like, all kinds of stuff. But I hope you know that, like, and something that I'm trying to learn is that your self-worth isn't really tied up in that type of stuff. But I know that today my self-worth was tied up in how happy my kids were. Still not as healthy, but still not super healthy, but I certainly made my kids really happy today. I got to play a bunch of Magic. I got to, play Pokemon TCG with my kid. And I got to, like, I did show notes today, Abe. I did 4 tournaments for the Power Rankings today. For those who don't know, we're doing Power Rankings for Pioneer today. That's all of you, unless you looked at the title. I got to do 4 challenges, and I did it so fast and so easy because I was on a time crunch. And, like, we talked, I think it was last week, you and I were talking about, like, how being under pressure, we both really like that due to our ADHD. And it really made me hammer home what I needed to do to get the show notes done today, which was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's really awesome that, like, you're, being really open about, like, that transition and, what you're doing with your life right now, and, like, how that's obviously, like, change constantly comes with, in anything, change constantly comes with, like, growing pains and its own challenges. But yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome that you're, like, finding ways to make it all line up, as that change is, like, definitely a big one. And I'm glad you're gonna get to spend more time with the little ones.
Yeah, I also just love both my kids. I feel really lucky to have such awesome children. I want to talk about Patreon really quick. No Patreon shoutouts this week, but due to the last segment, the Always Improving segment, where I talked about this, there was a really famous Magic video, Abe. And it got 2 different types of responses, but I'm going to just plug it really quick. It's the video that changed Tolarian Academy's life, where Tolarian Academy got fired from his job. Posted a video that says, "Can I have $1? Go to my Patreon, give me $1." I want to just say that if listeners did that for this show, I wouldn't need to get a new job. In fact, I don't think Abe and Mason would need jobs. Like, that's the kind of listener base that we have in a lot of ways, where we could really support ourselves through the show. I totally get that not every listener can give $1. That's not what I'm saying. But, if you've ever thought about giving to the show before, I will be open that my family is getting pretty close to struggling right now after 3 months of unemployment. And I just wanted to be honest about that on this segment, talking about the Patreon. That being said, if you want to donate more than $1, we have some pretty cool benefits. We're live right now, Abe. To patrons, we have patrons in the chat, on YouTube for our live show. We've got wristbands in my trunk right now that need to be sent out. That are, to be fair, part of that's my fault. And did I tell this story on the podcast? I think I told you and Mason. I tried to send every patron 3 wristbands, and the mail carriers were not having it. And historically,
they were being pretty not chill.
Yeah, historically, I've sent one with, like, a thank you letter and it's taped to it. But I was like, whatever, like, this will fit in a mailbox, so, like, it should work. And they're like, no, you can't do this. So I spent, like, 2 weeks packaging them for every patron we had last year, even if they had left. And then the post office was like, no, you can't send these. And I'm like, all right, well, I got to redo this whole thing then. So they will get sent, though, probably this in the next 30 days, actually, because I already have the new stuff made. So additionally, like, we if you're not able to make the live show, you get early access. We got a Discord for $5 or more, where people get access to deck lists. And, just to toot my own horn here, Abe, week 2 of Standard I told people, regardless of what was happening with mono black, with black red, with like everything that was happening, Center was like, hey, I just want you to know Grixis is the best deck. It's not close. Like, you should be playing Grixis. You're like, yeah, Spencer, that's great, but like black red's doing the best. I was like, I don't care. Like, I'm just letting you know Grixis is the best deck.
The receipts are in there.
Yeah, I just, you know, to toot my own horn, I'm pretty good at standard. And, you know, like, we have a standard channel where I'm doing that kind of stuff. So, like, RCQ coming up, or RC coming up, standard. So check it out. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying, Abe.
That, you know, honestly, it's a good point. Regional championship is coming up. It is standard, and our boy Spencer does be having the reads.
So, I just we want to give finally we want to give a shout out to our former sponsor GameGrid. We've been with GameGrid for 6 months, and we're transitioning away from that. They're transitioning away, and we just really appreciate them. Like, they did those awesome tournaments for us. We were able to give people trophies and stuff, and like, we'll continue those tournaments. We'll find a way to continue to do them. But man, I just really appreciate what GameGrid did for us and the support that our listeners showed them and buying cards from them. And I hope that you continue to support them, because what Jordan offers at GameGrid Lehigh is really awesome. So, all right, let's go into the power rankings though. So, for those who don't know, this is a staple of constructive criticism, Abe. We've been doing this since the dawn of time, as I would say.
It's written in the old texts.
Yeah, exactly. So how do points work? So the way it works is you get 6 points for a first, 5 points for a second, 4 for a top 4, 4 for a top 4, 3 for a top 8, 2 for a top 16, and then if we do it, 1 for a top 32. What events are included this time, Abe? Do you know? Okay, I just pressed the points. I didn't actually tell you.
I believe it was probably the last 2 weeks of challenges.
It is. It is the last 4 challenges, one of them being the challenge showcase. So, before we get into this, though, Mason's not here to fight with me on this, but did you know that we have 6 decks that we're going to talk about today? Did you know that the 6 decks we're going to talk about are the same 6 decks that are the 6 decks in the top 6 of MTG Goldfish and Pioneer?
That
is it shocking to you?
Yes. You know, actually, it's not that shocking to me that that's the case, because I really think Pioneer has gotten to a pretty stable, healthy place since the RCs. It's amazing what happens when there's a whole big tournament, a big set of few tournaments people actually care about, and people play a bunch of hours of Pioneer, and then they all come together and try to beat each other, and then wow, we have a metagame. It's crazy.
Yeah, so I just want to say that typically this show moves away from Goldfish data because of the way that Goldfish operates these days. But in this case, like, if you had spent the last couple weeks on Goldfish, looking at Goldfish stuff, the aggregate actually tells you not exactly what the winner's metagame looks like, but like, you would know what to worry about. And I just wanted to call that out. So, let's go to our honorable mention first. With 15 points, we have Blue-White Control. I also want to mention that Bant Control did just win. I want to be clear, though. A 60-card version of Bant Control did just win the NRG Championship.
Yeah, I mean, most of the... There's like the Yorion Blue-White Control in... and then there's the Kahira Blue-White Control currently in Pioneer. Those are like the 2...
Yeah, and I guess I should mention that it is Kahira that did well in the Bant versions. But what do you... I actually think this deck is hot, man. Like, I actually think that if there's a time where you and I could go to our roots, Abe, in Pioneer, it might be right now. Like, legitimately.
Yeah, I think the biggest reason... Because if you talk about, like, Blue-White Control, it was like kind of in this up and down cycle of being like, oh, Blue-White's just so good, and then it's like, well, Blue-White's like not very good. They just have a bunch of like absorbs in their deck, and that's pretty easy to beat, especially once the best deck was just like a Llanowar Elves deck. You'd fall behind so fast on mana and on board, and then like a lot of your cards didn't really catch you up in a meaningful way, and like it was pretty bad for Blue White. What has changed though, and what I think is really lending to like Blue White slowly kind of clawing its way up the rankings and really, week after week putting up a little bit better of a finish than the last, it seems, when I've been paying attention to the format, is laydown arms. Because the biggest, like I was saying, one of the biggest issues with Blue White, outside of kind of a little bit of an issue with hitting all its land drops sometimes, is that it so easily fell behind to cheap creatures because it didn't have good cheap removal. So like a Llanowar Elves on turn 1, there's not really, before laydown arms, there was like isolate, but there's not really a broad playable answer to anything that anyone's playing proactively. And as much as you'd think like, oh yeah, control deck good against maybe a deck full of creatures, it really was relying on like Supreme Verdicts to do a lot of heavy lifting, and that wasn't even like necessarily a good answer. It hadn't been for a long time. But now, because of laydown arms against a lot of the small creature decks and the Llanowar Elves decks, this one tool and being able to play a man invasive a bunch of planes so that you can answer those cheap creatures early, be it like, just answering a Fable for only 1 mana, a flipped Fable, or answering the Fable token, or answering the Llanowar Elves on turn 1. All these things really add up to a bunch of things down the line, where then the more expensive stuff that they're trying to do in Blue-White is a lot easier to do. And the turns where you're able to like answer a creature and then still leave up permission and not have to choose between answering a problem on the board and answering a problem that could develop have really made this deck's positioning just continue to increase. And so I'm not surprised to see it as the honorable mention. If you haven't paid attention to Pioneer since maybe the RC, it might be a surprise, but yeah, it's definitely like probably one of the biggest shifts.
Yeah. And honestly, just off your prayer streams, right? Like the fact that this deck has access to so many dual land planes without even having to like touch Trilands, right? And then like once you get into the Triland territory, you really do have even more if you want them. Really does help lay down arms. A card that I know that I was pretty high on going into this last set.
I think it might have been one of my hits.
I think it was mine. I think you're wrong. I think that if we go back, it's actually mine.
Wow. Well, someone had it. I remember talking about it.
We did talk about it. I'm pretty sure that the joke was that I was you on that episode. Remember, because I had like multiple white cards.
Oh yeah. Yep. That's true.
I like that you thought it was yours though.
Listen, man. I like the card. I
do too. I do too. No, I actually think this deck is really good. I think that like it also. Pioneer has so many good blue-white control cards. It's rough though because like so many of them are situational, and one of the things that didn't get on this list is like even blue-black control has some amount of winning. Like I think blue-black control actually won one of these challenges, and the problem that I have with that deck is it doesn't have something like lay down arms. It has fatal push and it has if you want to, you can play Bloodchief's Thirst. Thank you. But I just don't find it to be the same. Like, Lay Down Arms just cleanly does the thing, right? Like, you just have to play the planes, you play the card, you're good. There's no extra work that goes into that, and like the creatures in this format don't really get bigger than 5 mana worth of pips. So it really scales well.
And also exiling is it really is important.
Especially like even against decks like mono green, right? Like it really hits home there. So I'm a huge fan of this deck. I think like Wandering Emperor has been that card for so long, and just being able to see it really take center stage. I think everybody expected Temporary Lockdown. I know that Farewell was a card on our. I think that one was also mine. Apparently, I'm a blue-eye control stand, and I don't know it. But like there are so many cards that Pioneer has made up, but they haven't like coalesced, if that makes sense, into the right deck until now.
Yeah, I think that we'll get to it later in the power rankings, but I think that some other things about the format have really changed that have made it so that lay down arms solves the big problem, like the biggest glaring weakness in the blue white deck. But there's a lot of other things going on that have kind of pushed blue white also up
Yeah.
in its
And,
playability, and that's been really
and
helping.
we got a blue white stand in the Discord, so if you want to head on over to patreon.com/CMTG, Mikey's in the Discord, always toting that blue white. So green white angels comes in with 16 points. Listen, I'm going to be transparent. I have thought two of these decks have been historically bad. Two of them did really well. This is one of them. Abe, talk to me. Why is green white angels coming in at number 5?
Yeah, so one of the big things about Pioneer is that at a certain point, a lot of the games are just about big battlefield messes, and about like getting out resources. And the thing that's really changed for Angels is Kayla's reconstruction. The white X. Look at the top 7, put X creatures or artifacts from among them into play, and then put the rest in the bottom. So it's kind of like giving you just additional copies of Collected Company to the point where now your deck is just 27 creatures, 8 virtual Collected Companies, some of which scale even bigger than that, and then a bunch of lands. And they have just enough tools, really, um, just enough tools to keep the game like from getting out of hand against certain combo decks or decks that might go over the top of them. But they also just put together a really dominating board presence against other decks that are trying to build a board presence. Something that I talked about a lot back in 2019 Modern, when Bant Spirits was like one of the best decks, if not like the best creature deck. And kind of like the idea of Bant Spirits versus humans is that humans was really good, a little bit better being disruptive, had different kinds of disruption, a little faster, but Spirits was doing all the same things except it flew. All the creatures had flying, and they really didn't care about what you were doing on the board. So when it came to those matchups, they were advantaged. In the same way, Angels just gains a ton of life and goes way over the top in all battlefield battles, except for ones um, where like mono green like Nykthos is way out of hand and combos off. But because they have like Skyclave Apparition and 4 Collect Company and 4 Reconstruction, they can kind of find those ways to interact a little easier. And then their sideboard has a bunch of answers to that too. So they're really good at just kind of saying, you can't do anything unfair, and I'm going to have the biggest board. And so, yeah, Angels has really been just good at that for a long time, because so much of the format has been about creatures and having like nice big battlefield permanents. And what is nicer than a big flying thing that gained you 4 life when it came in, and now everything's huge? It's not much, and it puts a lot of things into play very often. So
You know what? This is the Spencer Toots' his own porn podcast, because I listen. You identified something really important about Kayla's reconstruction, because I was like, someone's gonna do this. Like this is Genesis way for like small. Like this is just gonna happen. Turns out that if everything that you puts in has flying and it's cheap, it's definitely good enough. Like it's funny. Like this is not where I saw this deck, this card when I talked about this, but as I was looking at decks, about the last, yeah, I would say the last 2 weeks, I was. It would be lying if there wasn't a grin on my face, being like, "Yeah, this makes sense. This is what we said on our podcast when talking about this card." Yeah, I think this deck does a really good job of being like mono white splashing company, but also getting access to things like Shaper Sanctuary. I think that depending on the builds, you can do light green splashes depending on kind of what you want to do, but you get it almost all for free. So, huge fan. I just want to also shout out, I also called it, Nykthos does in fact make an appearance in these decks now. And it really does help when you're thinking of Kayla's reconstruction. I literally said this, Abe. I need to. People need to listen to me. I said this.
I mean,
this is what I said.
I think also Angels, because it has like Resplendent Angel.
Yeah.
And like it has. Well, it's a couple things, right? Getting to cut more of the like random green stuff they might have had, and getting to play just collect companies as the green cards, and then also getting to like Nykthos with all of its white pips that it's now getting even more of off of Reconstruction, and then channeling that into like Resplendent Angel activations,
right?
And giving the whole team like huge buffs. That is a very real worth the one Nykthos,
right?
Worth the one Nykthos cost, and your mana can support it now. Now that you have Brushland, some of the lists I'm looking at have Overgrown Farmland.
Oh yeah,
I think the mana is going to get even better with the next set when we get the fast lands as well. The rest of the cycle for the allied colors.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah,
is that real life?
Yeah. That was announced today, I think.
Was it announced, or is that off of the?
No, that was. I saw a tweet from Carmen today.
Oh well, there we go. We're getting. So, were you telling me I'm getting Razorverge Thicket in this thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go. I didn't
so
see that today.
Yeah, I mean, you can afford to play one colorless land, especially when you only have the one. I think that's the only colorless land in the deck, and everything else is a possible white source. Yeah, so with the way it's built, everything else is possibly a white source, except for your pathways, which can be green
technically
sources.
Is a colorless land. The only thing you can use it for is Collect a Company, but it also acts as a spell. This deck plays 25.
Right, it's also a very relevant spell.
Yeah, and the deck plays 25 plus a flip land. So,
yeah.
If you're playing the Cleric, so. All right. What is next?
Next would be everyone's favorite deck coming in at 17 points. The most fun deck in Pioneer, Mono Green Nykthos. I don't know what else there really is to say about this deck. I will say that its positioning in the power rankings, if you compare it to just the metagame shares on Goldfish, Nykthos Ramp is the second most played deck in Pioneer according to MTG Goldfish.
Mm-hmm.
And for it to come in fourth is definitely a bit of a disappointment if you're someone who's a mono green fan, because it should be doing a lot better than this. If you look at the metagame shares, it has a full, like 5% on Angels, and for it to perform like only 1 point better says a lot about how the format has become and continue to get even more hostile for the mono green Nykthos deck, but also still how the deck is powerful enough to compete. Like, it's underperforming compared to its metagame share, but
honestly,
and it hasn't improved as much.
The list that won the challenge on the 14th is, I think, 1 card off or 2 cards off from what I recommended Quentin Pierce Former Coast play at the RC. It's just missing a 1 of Teferi for a 1 of Lovestruck Beast, and I think it's the exact list. I think I even recommended Hydras on the board. I think it actually is just 1 card off of what I recommended for the RC. I think that this deck is good. It's a top 5 deck. I think that that's undisputable, but I think it being the boogeyman is over with. That being said, like the number 1 deck that we'll talk about later, I think you have to respect this deck or else you're in trouble. Like, if you just don't respect decks, then they're gonna take over a format.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a couple things really have moved Nykthos Ramp downward. I think that Black Red specifically, which is also it's actually the most played deck in Pioneer according to MTG Goldfish, with just a 1% edge on Nykthos, and together they make up like 30% of the format, just about. Like just between a quarter and 30%, like 28% of the format is those 2 decks. Before, I would say that Nykthos was like heavily advantaged against Rakdos. I think now it's close to just advantaged. I think that in all the same kinds of long games, it's advantaged, but the games can get a lot shorter thanks to Misery Shadow, and also the Rakdos decks playing a bunch of Pithing Needle has changed that too, where
You know
where
what's
the
funny? I don't mean to like derail this, and we're not talking about this deck on the show, but obviously, Ginger, who came on the show to talk about the deck. If you want to learn about that deck before the RC, listen to that podcast. He also did a pretty in-depth talk about the changes to the deck on First Strike with Andy. Both of them friends of the show. So don't check that out. But have you seen the mono black deck?
Yeah, I'd seen versions of the mono black deck over time.
So that deck had a top eight. There's a mono black version of this of the Rakdos deck instead that like really leans into the Misery Shadow stuff. That I'm not gonna lie, looks kind of hot. Like,
yeah, there was actually a conversation I had with a friend of mine who played that deck at an RCQ where I was playing green, and we were kind of debriefing after the tournament where we actually played for top 8 against each other, and I eked it out in 3 games where he was like, yeah, I mean, I just wish I had like something a little better to do in the early game than like Gifted Aetherborn, but Gifted Aetherborn's like the best I've got. And I was like, we were getting sushi together, and I'm like, we're waiting for our food. I'm like scrolling madly through every 2-drop in Pioneer that's a black card, and I'm like, yeah, it really is the best you got. And Misery Shadow is a potent enough card that I think it really could swing things, and especially in the mono green matchup where the play pattern of Misery Shadow into removal spells for the devotion permanents and getting that exile effect, getting the most out of that, is one of the ones where you beat mono green a lot, and you take a lot less damage to your mana, but you probably are a little worse against like red black itself. But yeah, like that card definitely, and kind of just the thing about Nykthos, right? We talked for a long time about how there's not really a lot of room up for the green deck. The green deck is about as good and streamlined as it can be. There's only really 3 wiggle room slots anymore, and maybe 3 in the sideboard if you're willing to shave down your Karn Wish board. So it's like it's really hard to make a meaningful improvement there with a set release beyond what happened with Storm the Festival, unless something can change really structurally in the deck.
yeah.
But every other deck gets better cards every set, so it's kind of natural that this happens.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I want to be clear that the deck that I was talking about, I got 5th place on the 14th. The one that Nykthos actually won, but it started 7-0. It was actually first place going into top 8. It plays 4 Invoke Despairs, which was a card that people were trying in Rakdos for a while to try and win the mirror. Honestly, like, I think that there's a lot of room still for these Rakdos decks, and I think that's why people like Ginger have so much success, is like, people are just cutting red and trying this, but like all of the cards that they're playing are still playable in Rakdos if you build it right. I think Rakdos continues to be, in my opinion, the boogeyman of the format. I know a lot of people didn't think that going to the RCs. There were some RCs that it performed better at than others, but like, to me, I still think this is the best deck in Pioneer.
Rakdos?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Rakdos is like, and I've said this before when the question was like, is green the best deck or Rakdos the best deck? That I don't think either deck. Green is like less fun and worse if it's the best deck for the format to be enjoyable, and I'm kind of glad that, because both the fact that a lot of the decks that we aren't talking about in the power rankings today, a lot of decks we talked about in the past, like Phoenix and like Mono White, are still really popular and very playable and good. They can win a lot of matches. People register them all the time, and it's still a good choice. Those decks are good against mono green, and there's been a lot of work done in saying, okay, what is a deck I can play that's good against the field and good against mono green? It's kind of pushed it out. Black red, as we talked about, and I've talked a lot on even that episode with Misplaced Ginger, like, it's not as exploitable as green, but it also means that if this is the best deck in the format, is for someone to play a pile of like Thoughtseize, removal spells, some creatures, the format's in a really good spot, and I think that it is still kind of like the deck to beat. It's something you have to have a plan for, because it's going to be attacking your deck in such a fair and good way.
Well, I think the reason that we're talking about green right now and is that it asks a good question. Like, there are lots of decks that get to go big. Fire's decks got points. Those ask a big question. Creativity Combo had a top 8, where, for those who don't know, in this format, it's World Spine Worm plus Xenaghost. Like, you only creativity for 2, and then they die. But this format has so much going on. There were 4 colors fires deck, 5 colors fire decks. You know what deck we're not talking about this time that we talked about last time? I mean, you already mentioned Phoenix, but like, oh, you know what? That was a bonus episode. Now that I'm thinking about it, the last time we talked about Pioneer was a bonus episode for Patreon only.
Yeah, I think that might be the case.
Yeah, so you only like we're like referencing something that a lot of people might not have heard, but Greasefang. Greasefang had 1 top 16 total in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that doesn't really surprise me. I think that, like you were saying, with Mono Green kind of asking good questions of the format, which are like, you know, it actually sets a lot of the ground rules. It's like, you need to be able to kill Land or Elf. You need to be able to answer a 4-mana Planeswalker that's going to generate a lot of value. You need to be able to like deal with the fact that I might have some creatures in play that can attack you. Like, I can put a good clock on the ground. These are all things you kind of have to be prepared for when you're registering your deck and have a plan to be either doing some of that yourself or, you know, answering enough of that. And one of the biggest strengths of Greasefang was that it was just proactively asking a big question. And I think that now, and especially with, I think a big breakthrough is Rakdos and a lot of decks now adopting the whole Pithing Needle tech. I think that just playing a bunch of Pithing Needles has actually been a really, really big problem for the Greasefang decks, because if you Pithing Needle the vehicle, they just can't crew it and they can't attack you. And that, in addition to the rest of the scope of the format being, you know, more and more about, less and less about kind of punking people fast, and more about like being able to play a game of like muscling the opponent out, right? Like things like Angels performing well shows that it really can just be about getting on board. Greasefang doesn't do that meaningfully enough, I think.
Well, I mean, even we're not going to talk. We don't have Mono White on here, but like obviously Mono White did really well at the Energy Championship, right? And it goes to show that the format is not about what it was about even 2 months ago. Next up, we have Gruul coming in at 3rd with 19 points. I want to be clear that if we had included all vehicle decks, that this actually would come in at 2nd, because there was, in fact, a black-green vehicles deck that played Thoughtseize and, oh man, shaking your head hard. I actually tried it today. I have some thoughts. Black-green vehicles playing Thoughtseize and Fatal Push, and then not playing the red cards. Why are you shaking your head, Abe? Because people
listen,
force rock down.
This is gonna sound like it's got some hate behind it. There is no hate, okay?
Okay.
I've just seen Doomwake take a perfectly good Gruul deck that has a position in the metagame due to the threats it plays.
That wasn't who did it, was it?
That is, yeah, it's a Doomwake deck.
Doomwake did that?
He's worked a ton on the deck. And, like, I understand, like, the rationale all makes sense, but I think that you lose a lot of the edge of, like, very specific things to the Gruul deck by cutting out your red. I think that just being, like... I think you're probably also just worse against
as somebody who played
against red black as a result, and I think that's really, really hard place to be in.
Well, as somebody who has played a metric ton of Gruul vehicles, it is my favorite deck in the format. I know, shocking, people would think that my favorite deck would be Mono Green, and it's not. It is actually Gruul. I thought that there were things that were sweet about the black-green deck, but I have a really problem with an 8-elf Thoughtseize deck, just like on principle. Yeah. That is not where I want my Thoughtseize deck to be. I played today. I actually think I'm 3-0 with the deck right now, and all of my losses came from when I drew Thoughtseize and then too many elves. I think that there's a fundamental flaw that things like Stomp take out of the deck, and then additionally, the way that the deck was constructed, I think that I honestly, like, just looking at this format, I think that not having access to Rending Volley is a mistake. I actually think that the red sideboard cards are so good. I'm going to record a deck tech probably this week on Gruul and why a Crone War Plus vehicles is so good.
It's so good.
Like, because I think that people
It's a
don't
nice little secret.
understand. I think that people don't understand the interaction very well of like how you just freely get to kill their things.
Yeah, you get to kill their thing you're giving back, and you get to attack with your vehicle that
Yeah,
turn. It's nuts.
it is, yeah, it's pretty insane. And there's not like a good comp in black for that because it's like an aggressively slanted one-sided wrath. It's like there's just not a thing that you get out of the other side.
Yeah, the way that I would explain it, and this is kind of like the last thing I want to say about green black vehicles, is that like I understand what Doomik's trying to do, and I think that there is a lot of merit to it. But the way that I see it, and the way it's played out, and the way that I feel about it, is like if you saw chocolate and peanut butter, and we're like, that's a good combo. And then you saw peanut butter and jelly, and we're like, that's a good combo. And then you were like, what about chocolate and jelly? You're like, that's not going to be the worst thing I've ever experienced together. But we're looking at the like it doesn't actually just work like that. And
So hold on.
I think that
where do you come?
the gold gallery
I
vehicles
want to
deck is a very chocolate and jelly
understand
deck.
where people land on chocolate and jelly, and I need you to leave a comment here on the YouTube channel. No, I honestly I think that Gruul does a really good job of like. So I want to be clear. There's two versions of Gruul. There is the Reckless Stormseeker versions, and then there are the non-Reckless Stormseeker versions. What's really nice is that there are two versions, because I think people are forced to play against you as though you have Reckless Stormseeker, no matter what. Which I think is to the benefit of Gruul. I think it's a huge deal, where not a lot of decks get advantage to where, like, if you know the format, you know that this card exists in this specific deck. It's the only deck that plays it. And if you don't play around it, you die. Like, there's just so many times where you just like, oh, I'm dead. I love it. I think this deck is extremely fun to play. I think the fact that it gets to play 8 elves and Werewolf Pack Leader is really sweet. We've seen a ton of different versions. I actually think the version that 4-0'd a prelim is actually a deck list from our Discord, straight up. So there are tons of different ways to build this deck. There are, I think that this is one of the strongest decks, and in my opinion, the best aggro deck. I think it is better than mono white as far as like aggro decks go. I think it has a really good mono white matchup. This is like the type of aggro deck that I love seeing in formats. What about you, Abe?
Yeah, I think and one thing that we're about to get to as we move on here is that there is like a pretty big need for your deck to be able to move as fast as the Gruul deck, as like Reckless Stormseeker specifically allows the Gruul deck to move in some matchups. Like there is a real need to pressure your opponent quickly in some matchups, and like in the matchups where you don't have to do that, a lot of the time Lovestruck Beast and like your Bone Crusher Giants and your Chariots and your Boats will just be big enough. And I think Reckless Stormseeker really does an important job in all the matchups where it is about speed and allowing your deck to be the rest of it muscle and this one aspect of a little bit of a turbo button for the matchups where you really need it. Specifically like the random combo decks and things like Lotus Field, which we'll talk about. Or even against like mono green, a lot of your draws that you end up winning with where it doesn't involve the Chrome War, you just need to have your start that's so fast.
You need to be really quick to beat mono green. Like it's like you're playing on a similar axis to them, right? You're asking one of the same questions. Can you beat Elf? Well, if they can beat Elf, then you ask a different type of question than them, right? Their question is, okay, well, what if my whole deck is ramp? And your question is, what if you don't answer this question and then you die?
And also there's an amount of games where like as Gruul you might have like a stomp for an elf or something, but if you're going to spend that mana and that time interacting with the green's mana development, which is so key to do when you have those removal spells, you need ways to kind of get that time back.
Right.
And the haste from Stormseeker is really, really important in doing that too. I think that like that's another issue I have with the green black decks. It kind of disregards that need for your mid-rangey shell of beef to be able to like actually
Yeah, one of the
like
cards
interact with the format well, you need a card like Stormseeker.
I don't want to dump on the green black deck because I don't think that it's like bad. I just think that
No.
Thoughtseize 8 elves is like you could just play 6 elves. Is like I think that there's a way around it that like you could play like 6 elves, 2 Vraska in the main, and I think it would be like a much better deck. But
yeah, there's a lot of merits to
Yeah.
the green black. I don't
Yeah.
like sound like it's.
yeah, I just
think
I
that
don't
the
want
way
to
it's
dunk on it
currently
because I
constructed-
don't. I also think that like
Yeah.
I also think that like 5 removal spells, like 2 Blood Chiefs, there's 3 Fatal Push is like a way to go. Like, I don't think that the idea of like Golgari vehicles is out of the question, but I think that the point that you're making of like a Crow and War,
You can't
and
build it the
Reckless,
same way.
Yeah, like they're one of them is it's like levels of aggressive mid range, right? Where this Gruul deck is I have the ability to be the control deck, but that is like a tertiary game plan.
Yeah, I can be bigger than you.
Yes.
And as long as I'm bigger than you,
Yes.
I'll be okay with those kinds of draws. But that's for Golgari, a lot of the games it needs to be bigger. And that's where Thoughtseize really comes in and making
Right.
sure that it can stay bigger. But Gruul has the opportunity to say, I can be smaller and I can be lower to the ground because I have Stormseeker Chariot or Stormseeker Sky Sovereign, whatever those are.
Yeah, I huge fan of this deck. We already talked a little bit about the number 2 deck. This coming in with I think 22 points is Rakdos. As I said, if we had included Golgari, this would actually come in at number 3. I think this is the best deck in Pioneer. It's the thing that it's doing really well is that it's not asking a lot of questions. There's a really good clock. Like I think the clock of this deck is super underrated and people underestimate that. Like even myself, like I myself have talked about like how I didn't think like just I mean overall just different cards in this deck would line up well. For example, like Graveyard Trespasser is a card that like the second Liliana was printed, I was like, I can't ever imagine a world continuing to play Graveyard Trespasser in a world with Liliana. But because of the pressure that it puts on the format, it continues to see play. And Liliana is relegated to like mono black or like relegated to sideboards here. This deck clocks you really well. And while Sheoldred has fallen out of favor in Standard, it's actually still really hard to kill in Pioneer. So the format is warped around Sheoldred in Standard to the point where a lot of decks just don't play it anymore. They're like, all right, it's not worth this fight. It's 4 mana, do nothing. That is not the case yet in Pioneer, and it might be impossible to be the case for a little while. I know that some lists have gone to splitting Sheoldred with back to like Kalidas and stuff like that, just different ways to get around that type of stuff. But it comes down to the same thing. Like if you're going to kill Sheoldred, you're probably going to kill whatever other 4-drop other than Chandra that they play. I don't know. Like this deck just has the flexibility that it needs to continue to be a top 3 deck for as long as I can foresee. Abe, what about you?
Yeah, I think if you look at the Pioneer Showcase Challenge, Rakdos actually had a pretty dud performance considering how popular it is. But it's really popular for a reason, and it's really well equipped to handle all of the breadth of the format. And we're only talking about 6 decks here, but we've already talked about 2 other kind of fringe builds of decks.
Can you imagine how good Spirits would be if this deck didn't exist, though?
I mean,
like
people still play Spirits and win.
I know, but I'm saying like, like this deck.
What I'm saying is that right now we're only talking about a snapshot of like the top of the format and what's really performing well, but the format is so much broader than just the 5 or 6 decks that we're discussing. Yeah. There's like so much going on in terms of Fires of Invention decks or Spirit decks or the Creativity deck, the mono white deck. There's a ton of different decks attacking the format from different angles, and Rakdos is the only deck that really feels like it's prepared to interact with all of them. It brings tools to really, I guess Blue-White does as well, but Rakdos both brings tools to fight all of those from an angle of I'm going to put you to the test of answering what I'm doing, as well as I'm going to put you to the test of like weathering through my interaction.
I,
And so, it just is a really, really solid mid-range deck. It has all of the tools to fight everything. It's definitely the most consistently, like, you're not gonna have many matchups where it's like super all over the place, right? If you're playing mono green, you might have good matchups against half the room, bad matchups against half the room. Rakdos, it's pretty much the same all the way through, and um, that is really the strength of the deck, that it is that consistently good at doing that.
yeah, in all honesty, like, earlier in the show, we talked about the hammer time versus creativity matchup, right? Where, like, knowing the matchup and understanding the matchup is like, we have a joke on this podcast that's ancient old. A lot of listeners probably don't even remember it, but knowing is the half the battle. GI Joe, like, it was we were gonna get shirts made that said knowing is half the battle again, and a flathead screwdriver still works on a Phillips screw a large percentage of the time. And being able to use that Phillips screwdriver and use that tool when it works for that situation is what this deck is trying to do. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that it also, you see it in the way that the deck, if you go and look at MTG Goldfish and you look at all the different Rakdos decks, the ones that really perform well, and something that I think might even be true about why it performed not so well in the showcase, is that the showcase's metagame is so much less predictable because it is an event for, the highest level of the qualified players, right? Everyone's like really trying hard to win that event and really do things that are not just playing the same 75 again in the same way someone might at a challenge or an RCQ, where it's really about consistency, and just like, kind of jamming an event. People put a lot of effort into it and do a lot of things that are kind of off the beaten path. And it's a lot harder for a deck like Rakdos to be prepared for that. But currently, Rakdos has found ways to adapt to all of the changes in the format, and retain plans for all of the important decks. And being on top of that week to week, if you're someone who can do that, right, like Misplaced Danger does that a lot, and he wins a lot with red black. And so that's really like the strength of the deck, is its ability to do that. But if you're ever caught with the wrong 75, it can feel like much more disastrous than if you show up with the right one. If you show up with the right one, you might just feel like you have the tools for everything. If you show up with the wrong one, you feel like you're playing the wrong deck for the wrong tournament, and your day's over pretty quick.
Let's talk about being caught with the wrong 75 with our number one deck. And I actually don't mean it the way that people probably expect me to mean it. I think that historically I've said this deck is utter garbage and you should not play it. But I don't think that I can say that if it's coming in with these results. And that is Hidden Strings combo, the Lotus Field deck. I want to be clear, like, I love being wrong because it gives me opportunities to learn. I looked at a lot of these deck lists today. And I'm going to be honest, I have a lot to learn because I still don't see how this deck performs this well, Abe.
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons why Hidden Strings does so well. And the first one is that they found a way to make their deck just a little bit faster in spots. In order
a little
to,
faster. They're at least 2 turns faster than they were at the beginning of the RCQ season, right?
Yeah, I mean, Hope Tender, the addition of that technology, which is if you don't know Hope Tender, all-star from Hour of Devastation. It is a creature that has 1 mana tap, untap target land, and has 1 mana exert Hope Tender, untap 2 target lands. So when you have your Lotus Field set up and you have this card, it's like having an additional Hidden Strings just kind of sitting around, or like it enables you to do a lot more in your turn, and it allows you to compete with kind of a thing that was holding back Hidden Strings in some matchups, of where you'd play against a deck like Mono Green, and you would actually just be not that much faster or even more consistent. If anything, you'd be like
slower and
weak
less
to things
consistent.
like you'd be slower, less consistent, vulnerable to cards like Beseiju, and like it was kind of a liability, and you would lose to like a single Karn getting something. Now you have a way to go faster than them, and also faster than other other versions of the combo decks.
So for what it's worth, this deck now has, it probably always had this ability, but it looks like it could now have a lot more turn 3 combo offs than it ever could before. Kind of between Hope Tender, the Vizier, and just kind of the way the deck is constructed now. Am I off base by saying that?
I think 3 might still be kind of tough because you often play a tap land on 1, but like, yeah, sure. I mean, if you got like Grazer,
I mean, just Botanical Sentiment into Grazer, put in, any land.
Yeah, I mean, you put in stage, you untap, you like play your Hope Tender and your tap land, and then like you play your 4th land, float some mana. Your 4th land's the
I mean, even Hidden Strings.
4th land's Lotus Field. You float some mana. You
actually don't even
do the thing.
You don't even need the Hidden Strings does it too, right? Because you still get. Anyway, we don't want to go in the combo, but
but the deck's gotten appreciably faster. And also, people have, because of the breadth of the format, been forced to play even less things. Like before, it was like a question of, oh, well, if this deck ever gets good, I'll just bring some Damping Spheres, and Damping Sphere will be my answer. But there's a couple things that change that, which is that Hidden Strings has a ton of Boseijus in it. You have Sylvan Scrying and 3 copies of Boseiju in the main deck, and you have like 2 copies of Otawara, so they have more lands that do things. Like those are really big updates, tutorable answers to previously lights out permanent hate, right? If you like let them have the mana or even set up to have the mana, they can pretty easily wiggle out of a bind that's caused by just like 1 or 2 like hate permanents. And so that's been a big change. And also just the format as a whole has made it so it's hard to even fit that much hate in your sideboard if you're something like Rakdos. Like I was saying how people turn to Pithing Needle a lot because you can Pithing Needle Thespian stage, or Pithing Needle, like, Hope Tender if you don't have a removal spell for it and you already have Thespian stage named. But Needle covers also the green matchup in naming Karn or things like that, and also slows down this deck. But you can't just afford to dedicate a slot to this deck anymore, right? That says that you need to have a card that covers multiple decks because the format's so broad. And the broader the format is, the more that a deck that does a specific powerful thing like this has an opportunity to get away with it. And so it really has been getting away with it recently, and it continues to be a very real metagame contender. It's gotten like so much stronger than it was before as a result of people actually putting in the work on it, and before it had kind of fallen a half step behind the whole format in playability. But now I think it's able to be a step ahead.
Well, you really hit on the joke that I was making to start this part of the segment, right? Which is like talking about submitting the wrong 75. If you're a boomer like me and Abe, then you might remember the affinity taxes placed on your sideboards in Modern. I think that this deck, it really does ask that kind of question because it's attacking from an angle that no other deck is really attacking from in the format. So you need to decide, are you going to dodge this deck because of like Abe said, the breadth of the format, or are you going to say, I'm not going to lose to this deck, even though I typically would have a bad matchup to it?
Yeah, I think just overall the deck has gotten to a point where it no longer... It used to be like if you just had some duresses and go blanks, it would be enough. That's not really the case anymore for even red-black, and so those small edges have really added up. And it's not really surprising that, especially when the format is not
hold on,
under...
because red-black decks are not playing duress right now, so I want to disagree with you there.
No, they're playing like 0 to 2, somewhere between there. Like obviously some play none.
Okay, I was going to say that they're playing a lot less duress than they were.
There's not a consensus, but they do, like, if you are playing like duresses, you have to be playing duress.
I just want to be clear that we're on the downswing of people playing duress and the upswing of this deck. So I don't know that we can definitively say that duress plus go blank is not enough. I don't know. Maybe I
would say that it isn't, because people, and the reason I'm saying that is because we're seeing duress go away. Because we're seeing duress turn away to be copies of things like Pithing Needle, to be things like
sure,
like harder interaction, or conceding more of the idea of this matchup in order to gain points elsewhere. But I think
Yes,
that
that
that's
could be
not
true too.
necessarily going to be not necessarily going to be right. If this trend continues, I think that more people are going to have to adapt. But again, like we saw during a time where, you know, I mean, there wasn't a new card that was printed that changed how hidden strings could be built. People just chose to spend a bunch of time trying to build hidden strings in a way that was better, and it came out better. And I think that in the same way, people aren't necessarily right now trying really hard to beat hidden strings
Yeah.
um, all the time. And so it's still in a good spot and still has a lot of structural strength against the metagame with the updates. And so it's definitely something you have to be aware of and know your plan against and have a plan against. But I wouldn't say it's like, oh, this is the new best deck. This is what's going to be everywhere. Everything. I still think that like Rakdos, when it has the tools and
Yeah.
if you spend the time working on it, will still be better than this. But it has been doing very well recently. It's in a
And,
very good position.
and I think that that's something worth noting, and something that we should like. I actually, as much as Mason's not here to continue to dog on this deck, but like, as much as Mason and I have dogged on this deck, like it's good for this deck to find its way back into the metagame and to like pressure the metagame in new ways. That's good, healthy churn for a format. And I think that asking these type of questions again and forcing people will continue to make metagame shifts. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's like, and one of the things I love about Pioneer is we kind of get to the close of our power rankings. One of the things I love about the format is that there are a lot of ways the format gets attacked, even if it's not a way to attack on all of the different angles. What you like, you can get anything you want really out of Pioneer as a format as far as what kind of games you're playing. You can play really controlling decks like Blue White. You can play, different kinds of very aggressive decks. You can play combo decks that are like really weird compared to other combo decks that you even see nowadays. Like something that I think Arlax pointed out was like probably the last bastion of playing like an ad nauseum tendril style like ritual based storm deck of like I'm gonna make a bunch of mana and do a bunch of things in one turn. This is like the last place you can do that, but all of the pressures exist on the format to cause you to have a format that really represents quite a broad set of what Magic is, and that really makes Pioneer a great format to me to like to play. And really it says there's a lot of room for any kind of player, anything that you have a preference towards. There's probably a Pioneer deck for you to play, and there's also just a lot you can learn about Magic in the big sense from playing a lot of these games of a lot of these different kinds of archetypes that aren't necessarily always represented in standard, aren't necessarily always represented in modern in the same way that modern has much decks that do like 3 different things all the time. But these decks are all pretty streamlined and pretty straightforward in what they're trying to do, with the kind of game they're trying to play, and you can really like see and learn a lot and experience a lot through the format. I think it's in just such a good place, and it's made me so happy to see a year ago or whatever being like, yo, Pioneer format's awesome, you got to play some, and I'm like, nah, that's whack, to like now in RC later seeing the format in a really really healthy place. I know a ton of people who just really they want to go to the Pioneer RCQs, they want to play that like as much as they want to play modern, whatever. They're happy now they have their deck, and seeing all of those different things going on in the format that make me feel like it really is just a healthy format. It's good to see. It's good to see Magic is in a really good place right now.
All right. Let's move on out of our main topic into our Patreon question. You want to ask these from Patreon of $5 or more and fill out the Google Doc like Mikey did. Mikey says, when it comes to applying a solution to a problem, is it ever worth it to splash a color in your deck? This is talking about our episode last week. And I think there's a lot of historical precedents for this. And also, it really hits home something that maybe we should have touched on in the episode, to be honest, Abe. I mean, we both are familiar with things like Sparkblade and Darkblade, Creeping Tar Pit to hit Jace the Mind Sculptor, Spark Mage to hit Squadron Hawk. We're both familiar with, just adding Tarmogoyf to our Blue Moon decks. Like, historically, yes, absolutely. If there's a problem that a simple splash can solve, it's definitely worth looking into.
Yeah, I would say that when you're thinking about a problem in deck building and you're identifying the problem to be like, okay, this is like, this is the problem I'm facing as far as what's going on in the games. How can I solve it? And the only solution you can think of, or the cleanest solution you can think of, is to add another color to your deck to have access to a card that changes the dynamic there. Try it out. That's when I would say it's worth it, is when you're looking at the options. You can't find a clean option that really works without making your mana, like, if it doesn't make your mana much worse, then you should probably try it. If your mana can support it, it's probably worth doing, because if you're able to cast it consistently, then it doesn't really matter that you have a third color in your deck. But if it's going to hurt your mana, then now you're like getting to a trade-off point. So yeah, I would say splashing and coloring your deck is more a function of the cards that you have available to you. If there's not really another solution, then you just might have to.
I never thought that I would mention Darkblade and Creeping Tar Pit hitting Jace the Mind Sculptor again on this podcast, and I'm really grateful for this question, for what it's worth, Nike. Like, what a world. What a world. But no, I do think that, the number of times where Boros might turn into Naya, or the number of times where Blue-Red turns into Rug, or we've definitely seen... Blue-Black Death Shadow turn into Grixis Death Shadow, or, whatever it is. There's lots of opportunities for this type of stuff, but it has to be that core thing that we talked about in the last episode, right? Identifying the core problem, and then once you've done that, understanding, like, okay, is this a solution that I can live with the consequences of? Kind of as Abe's highlighting there, so. All right. If you want to hear your question answered, don't forget to head on over to YouTube. Put a question in the comments. Helps out the episode a ton. And then don't forget to check out the rest of the network. I'm actually recording tomorrow with Michaela for the return of Mythicast. And then don't forget to check out Drafting Archetypes. We really appreciate those shows and the things that the people, Michaela, for coming back with me and what Sam does. You can like, sub, comment, review, whatever you can do to kind of push it into that algorithm. That's what the world is about now, Abe. It's about algorithm pushing, and those things will really help the show. If people want to find you, where can they do that? Oh my.
Yeah, people can find me over at twitter.com/morenothings. I still have opportunities open for coaching, not just of Hammer. I realize that a lot of people have the conception that I do only coach on Hammer. I do coach, like, if you're someone who wants to get into Hammer, I will give you the most specialized attention around, like, making sure you're playing Hammer at, like, an incredibly high level if you want to, or even just getting to that point where you can start growing in that way and helping you understand the deck. But I've been working with one of our patrons, Evan, for almost a month now on really reinventing his approach to the game and, like, thinking about things in new ways. And we actually had a session right before we recorded this, in full transparency, and it's been a really big help to him. So, if you're someone who really wants to just improve the way they're approaching the game, I'd love to help you with that. Or if you're someone who just wants to learn more about any specific deck or tighten up your technical play, all of those things I can help with. You can just send me a DM on Twitter and we can set up a time. How about you, Spencer?
Hey, you can find me at Spencer13H. You can find Mythicast as my monthly podcast that I do alongside this with Mythic Michaela here on the Constructor Criticism YouTube channel, as well as the website. And then, yeah, I had a really good conversation about coaching an entire team for this upcoming RC, both helping them from, like, a team perspective, like coaching them as a team, as well as doing individualized coaching for that. Still have a ton of spots open. So hit me up on Twitter is probably the best place, but Facebook message can also work, as well as just emailing me at spencerhowland@gmail.com. Just a friendly reminder, if you get the chance to support the show, head on over to patreon.com/ccmtg. And just want to give a shout out to Mason. We miss you, man. See you soon. We'll talk to you guys all next week on another episode of Constructed Criticism.